Hello, everybody. This is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today, we're going to talk about the calling of the Apostle Matthew and what we can learn from that. Now, before I begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Most of you guys are familiar with the story of Matthew. Matthew was the tax collector and hated by pretty much everybody who knew him. And Jesus saw him. And this is, of course, detailed in the Gospels, I believe in Matthew, when he says, "Follow me." And he did. And, you know, it's such a simple thing because you look, we have an episode on the calling of the first four apostles, Peter and James, John, and Andrew, when they were fishing. And Jesus told them, after a long day of fishing during the day, then they didn't catch anything. He's like, go over there and fish. And they're like, it's the daytime. The best time to fish is at night. But they listened to Jesus, and of course they pulled up a bunch of fish, and then Peter believed and they followed him. Matthew's even more interesting because I think we can learn a lot from him because he's kind of like the episode we did on Zacchaeus, the small man that was climbed on the tree that met Jesus. He wanted to see Jesus so badly because both of them are living a life of idolatry, so to speak. They're living a life of money. So Matthew is a tax collector. So if you're not familiar with this, tax collectors are reviled because for many reasons. One, they're essentially Jews working for the Roman state, the occupiers of Palestine, present-day Palestine. And they're collecting money. And since the Jews at the time don't want to be occupied, that's like strike one against anybody who is complicit in working with the enemy to take money from you. Secondly, tax collectors are known to skim off the top, to embezzle a little. They're notorious for doing that, and that's why they make money off of it. It's because they, it's like four for Caesar Augustus, one for me, for pretty much, and that was accepted. And of course, they were reviled for that. They were reviled so much that families, children of tax collectors, couldn't marry Jews because they were so hated by the people that if, let's say, Matthew had a daughter or a son, no one would marry them of any good standing, or Matthew had a younger sister, a younger brother. They were that reviled. But Matthew was a tax collector, and because of this, he was making money. And for all intents and purposes, he was successful. But like Zacchaeus, who has all the money and wants to see Jesus, and after he sees Jesus, he makes all these promises. I'm going to stop being corrupt. I'm going to start giving my money away because that's the effect of Jesus. Matthew is in need of something. He's looking for something. So when Jesus comes to him and says, "Follow me," he drops everything and he goes. Because why does he go? Because he understands that his life is empty. His life is empty. He's wealthy. He will continue to be wealthy. But his life is empty. There's no purpose in it aside from accruing money. And so he's willing to give up money to follow a stranger. I mean, we talked about it when Jesus called the first four. It's like, I don't even know this guy. Like, follow me. Okay. I mean, that is faith beyond faith. And it's the same thing with Matthew. At this point, Jesus kind of had a following, but it's the same thing. I'm going to live my life of means and comfort to follow a potential false prophet, because we know during this time there were a lot of other people purporting to be the Messiah. Matthew doesn't know that Jesus is real, and there were other people that were doing signs. We know that because Jesus talks about the apostles like, these guys are exorcising demons, and Jesus says, if they're not against us, they're for us. So how does Matthew really know that this guy is legit? But I think it's more telling, and we can relate to Matthew, because how many of us are living a life of empty, dissolute wealth? We know that the more money somebody has, the less likely they are to be religious. It's just human nature. The wealthy don't tend to practice. And this is why I talked about in the episode I did on the parable of the weeds, parable of the sower, how a lot of Catholics think that they're on fertile ground, but they're really not in fertile ground. And I can include myself. The majority of us are really in the thorns. We think we're on fertile ground. But what happens to the seeds in the thorns? They're getting choked. What are they getting choked on? Wealth. And so even the best Catholics, if they're not careful, are getting choked by wealth and being idolatrous. And you can't worship God and mammon, as Christ says. So Matthew, we can learn from Matthew, we can learn from Zacchaeus. These guys who had money, but they were empty, because money doesn't make you happy. You look at all the celebrities, how dysfunctional their life is. Money doesn't make you happy. It can give you some security, but it doesn't make you happy, and it makes your life empty. And this is what we constantly tell atheists, and atheists eventually learn this. What's the point? You're like, I'll be happy when I get my first meal, and then I get my first meal, and you're still not happy. I'll be happy when I get my second meal. So a fully fulfilled life is a life with a relationship with the higher being. And this is something that Zacchaeus and Matthew, who were, Jewish at the time, they're practicing their faith, they gave all that up to follow Jesus. And that was a humongous risk at the time. It's just, I'm going to leave my life as a tax collector. Yes, he's hated. Yes, he's not really well liked. But he could have gone maybe into another field. But he's like, I'm going to leave this life of wealth and comfort to follow this man. Who knows what's going to happen to me? And of course, he ends up being one of the apostles. And eventually, after Christ's death, if you go to the episode I did on how each of the apostles were martyred, aside from John, the evangelist, he was eventually martyred when doing a mass in Ethiopia or Persia. This is kind of like small sacred oral tradition. Most people think it's Ethiopia. He was doing a mass. The king wanted to marry, I think it was his niece, and Matthew was against it. And so Matthew intervened and stopped it. And so the king sent people to kill him, and he was killed during a mass. Because yes, we did have masses in the first century. I mean, they were what we would say today, proto-masses, but yes, there was definitely the real presence and so forth. So does Matthew regret the life of forsaking money and being a tax collector to follow Jesus Christ? I don't know. Maybe one day I'll be lucky enough to ask him if I go to heaven, but I doubt he does. I really doubt he does. But we can learn a lot from Matthew, and we can learn a lot about these parables and stories of these apostles, because ultimately we need to follow Christ fully and love him with all of our heart, mind, and soul, wherever that leads to. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.